You didn't know disposable cameras existed?
In 2024. No, I
They got to
didn't.
exist somewhere, right? Like in the burner phone section,
the,
or
the, the wife and I just found, man, we were so disappointed. We found disposable cameras from our wedding. We had them, they were
Mhm.
in a box in our garage. And because we had at
like
our
undeveloped ones?
undeveloped.
Oh wow.
So we're like, oh man, we're gonna find like the jackpot. I'm gonna see all my friends' genitals, you know?
Yeah. That's a sounds like a weird wedding.
Yeah, yeah.
Glad I wasn't there.
You know, people taking pictures of their ass. Nothing,
Yeah.
nothing on it. There was like, yeah, like pictures of flowers. Not like I was like, man, no one that came had a sense of humor.
Wait, so uh where did you take him? Yeah, I love immediately like you're at a wedding and then you just assumes people's genitals come out. I'm
Yeah.
like, sounds
Yeah,
that's quite the Rubicon
yeah,
to cross
yeah.
to get
It
yeah,
was sign of the times.
yeah, at a wedding do
yeah.
that. Dude, I was gonna ask you, how was Sturgis?
Man, dude. So going into it, I mean, it's originally, like, from my understanding, a Hell's Angels rally,
Yeah, it's
and
motorcycles, right?
right.
Okay.
So,
You buying a motorcycle now?
man, I've never been so close.
Really?
Just to say that I'm a biker. I would never
Oh,
ride it. I'd probably just keep it in my garage, but I would like wave at bikers as they drove by.
wait.
You know, like
Well, I know how they
I
I
give
know
them
how
like
they
the
do that
yeah.
thing to the
I
they
want to be
point
able
to
to
the
do
ground
that.
or
I
whatever.
want to do that. I don't want to be on a bike though, because
Yeah.
those are scary. Two wheels
Oh yeah,
aren't for me.
I've never I've rode on one obviously, like holding on to somebody.
I've never driven one.
You never even been on one?
No, I've
I've
never been on one
I've
either.
never driven one, but I've been on the back of one.
Yeah,
Like
holding on to some hunk.
yeah, holding on to something like when I was a kid or something, I
Uh,
think. But I was like, oh no, I'm never gonna ride one of those. I was like, I guarantee I'll kill myself. Like not deliberately. I'm saying I would do something stupid, and then I would die for
yeah,
sure.
just take a chance. But no, it was like, so I was expecting sort of, I don't know, to be on guard. I'm like, okay, biker gangs are gonna be there. Am I gonna? I was expecting aggression. Man, it's like it's right what you would expect. They look exactly like you think. They look like bikers, but it had like a music festival atmosphere to it. So it was
Was there
really
any
just
was there any big names there, music wise?
yeah.
Well,
Buck,
Kid Rock was obviously there.
Buck Cherry opened for Kid Rock.
Oh,
Yeah, so it wasn't huge names.
but it was
Buck
just
Cherry's about the second biggest. But then I mean,
that was it though. That
yeah.
doesn't sound like a music festival.
No,
That
I
sounds like,
had that feel to
oh,
it. Like people
okay.
were in that just sort of happy, hey, you know.
But what do you? So I was wondering, like, what do you do all day though? Right? How do you occupy your time?
Man, there's just like the whole, like, there is stand after stand after stand, like merchandise stands. Everyone, it's like a big, like an expo, I
Yeah.
guess would be a way to put, like
Yeah.
it's for sure an expo. There's, man,
Just strictly
vendors
motorcycles
of,
or just
no
cool
all
stuff?
kinds of stuff.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, vendors of all stripes. I mean, a lot of bike stuff, obviously, but
yeah.
vendors of all stripes.
I have to imagine the bikes were pretty cool though.
Oh my god, dude.
Yeah.
Yes, I can't imagine the amount of money that people have to dump into some of those things.
Yeah. That's no, that's cool. I mean, but it was a pretty cool vibe though.
Yeah, it was.
I was
It
a little
was.
bit because I obviously had to bail on it, but I was wondering, like, sometimes I don't know. I've just noticed when we've been to music festivals before, and sometimes it's just our look. I think like other dudes just want to start crap with us, like just because of how we look sometimes.
I know, and that wasn't there at Sturgis.
Right? Which I mean, I don't know. But I feel like I have a face that people want to punch. So I'm like,
yeah,
because I don't know. Sometimes dudes just size me up. Sup with you, dog? Like, nothing. I was like,
yeah.
here to like some music, So it's always been. Anytime I go to those, I always feel a little on guard.
I
Like
think
you were saying.
I mean, they weren't festivals, but the last two times that we went to Park City to watch somebody,
Yeah.
like it seemed like you didn't start things, but people kind of
Yeah, I mean,
instigated you.
we were, and obviously we do our own shenanigans, but still. Well, that's cool. That was fun though.
yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So
Next year is the 85th, and that's when the Hells Angels are supposed to roll in deep. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but
maybe
if we
skip that one too.
yeah, probably.
If Sons of Anarchy has taught me anything, all those murderers and rapists have a heart of gold at certain times.
That's
So-
they have to win hearts and minds.
Did you see any brawls up there? Anybody get stabbed?
Nothing.
Wow.
I mean, that probably happened, but I didn't see it.
Okay. Well, I don't know. We'll see. And where is it? North Dakota, South Dakota?
South Dakota,
Where's Mount Rushmore?
there. We went there too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Kind of unimpressive, huh?
Man, until I saw how they did it, to watch a little video on how they made it. That's badass.
I saw that, but the sheer size of it, like when you see it in movies or pictures,
it looks way bigger.
It looks way bigger.
But here's the thing: when was the last time you were there? When was the last time you were there?
Well, so I was up there, and it was because Newcastle in Wyoming is like 45 minutes away from Mount Rushmore. So
they built like a pavilion to go further up.
Really?
To it. Yeah.
Okay. This was a weird time too, because this was summer of 2020, and so obviously that like COVID stuff that was all locked down, so you couldn't. I mean, it was weird, but I mean, it's still cool. I liked it, but I didn't get close. I just saw it from far away. But I was like, damn, I thought it was way big. I thought it was like a mountain. You know,
like they're doing with Crazy Horse.
Yeah.
Did you see Crazy Horse?
Yeah.
They got funding going for that again.
Oh,
so that whole mountain's going to be
one of those things that'll never be finished.
Yeah. Oh, they said like 100 years.
Well, so you sent me this clip that we were going to react to today. This was Abigail Shrier. She's getting big in a lot of heat, though. Usually it's over stuff to do with like transgender issues, right?
Right.
I know. Excuse me. She was on Rogan's podcast for a minute, and that's what I think. There was a lot of controversy around that. She wrote a book and whatever. But this doesn't seem like it has this interview doesn't have anything to do with that, right? This was with Chris Williamson. And who is that guy, by the way?
As far as I know, just a podcaster. I started following him. He has interesting guests on. He's reasonably fun to listen to.
Yeah, no, he's got it was the first time that I've watched him or heard him, and I was like, man, this guy's kind of cool.
Yeah,
like,
he's
pretty chill and everything. So
well,
we can kind of get into it. So as I picked out some clips on this, and this is kind of I named our episode kind of after her model Bad Therapy, so we'll kind of do a reaction to this. We're not going to watch the whole thing because it's like an hour, but I picked out some choice clips, and we'll kind of go through those. I did have this is like a first time ever type things that I wanted to get through, but we have this is an opening commercial which I just could not get away from. So let's maybe take a look at that, and then we'll watch some Abigail. Sound like a plan?
You bet.
Hi, it's Fitz with slap chop 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 chop. Watch this. Hi, it's Fitz with slap chop. You're gonna be the great food all day. You're gonna be slapping your troubles away with slap slapping your troubles away with slap chop. Hi, it's Fitz with slap chop. You're gonna be the great food all day. You're gonna be slapping your troubles away with slap slapping your troubles away with slap chop. Look, here's a potato. One slap, you get 50 chunks of stew. Two slaps, both rise. The second minute, look at this. If you add a mushroom, what do you do? Get your switching great. Now, you love salad, you hate baked salad, you hate baked salad, you hate baked salad. So if we don't have any salad, you gotta watch this one salad. Super cool sauce stuff, 5 seconds, 4 or 5 seconds, it's done. This thing is tuna, it's boring. Stop having the boring tuna. Stop having the boring life. Add this tuna, make it like this. Now you're gonna have a nice, exciting life. Now here's some hard-boiled egg. One shot, you add the meat, and once you can do it, you mix things together, you got ham, and you're gonna love this. You don't have time to make breakfast. Breakfast to go. Watch this, you're gonna love my nuts. Watch this, you're gonna love my nuts. Watch this, you're gonna watch this. You're gonna watch this. Watch this, watch this, watch this, watch this. Mango. Watch this. Watch this. Watch this. Watch this.
3 a.m. over at your place. You may have been asleep or something. Okay.
How would you categorize what is happening with modern mental health?
Oh gosh, we're making it worse with too much treatment, too much diagnosis, and way too much psych meds, and convincing people who are otherwise well that they are unwell, that they have a mental health problem.
Right, yeah, apocalyptic start there. So take me through, how much of this is an adult problem, how much of this is a kid problem? Are there some cohorts that this is worse and better in?
Sure. So if I have a prejudice here, it's that adults mostly can handle their own lives. and we can trust them too. So if some adults have been made to feel worse by things like therapy they don't need or psych meds they don't need or whatnot, I generally think that an adult can say, this is helping me or it isn't, and push back and make it a change. But a child can't. So the bigger problem, what I wrote my book about, is about why putting a child through a culture of therapy, through a school system that constantly treats them to various forms of what I call bad therapy, therapy that makes your symptoms worse or introduces new symptoms, why this is all so harmful, this constant feelings focus, this constant convincing children or young adults that they've experienced childhood trauma.
Talk me through a typical timeline of mental health for young people. Like, do 3-year-olds need have mental health problems? Like, what's the onset and kind of what's the arc of this?
Sure. So as of 2016, the CDC, which is the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, came out with a report. This is 2016. 1 in 6 American children between the ages of 2 and 8 already had a mental health or behavioral diagnosis.
Wow.
Okay,
Well, just dig into that for a second for me. What does that mean? What would that look like?
So what mental health diagnoses do they usually have?
What does that mean? Yeah, mental health
That
diagnosis.
that means a shocking number of little boys have been diagnosed with ADHD or oppositional defiance disorder. If they can't sit in their seat or they're yelling back at a teacher, they have oppositional defiance disorder. A shocking number of girls now have an ADHD diagnosis. They're diagnosing all kinds of kids as on the spectrum or having anxiety or now, do some of these kids are, there's no question a lot of these kids are sad, and a lot of them are lonely, and a lot of them are anxious. But we are psychopathologizing a whole generation and convincing them that they are unwell, so they are behaving like they are unwell.
Right, okay. So it seems like, at least so far, there's 2 problems that you've got. One being this over-medicalization or pathologization of human emotions, some of which get into things like trauma, depression, anxiety, but others are just feeling sad or down or lonely or fearful. Like, that's not necessarily something that the DSM would find, but it's this concept creep. And then the other side of this is the treatments that are coming through and the way that people are dealing with that. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes, exactly. We are introducing new symptoms and making existing symptoms worse.
Okay.
So normal sadness becomes depression. Normal worry becomes anxiety. No young people even use the word worry anymore. It's all, or nervous. It's all, I have anxiety. And they think of anxiety as something they have and therefore have to be treated out of or monitored by a therapist or treated by a therapist or medication.
Okay, so you mentioned there was those numbers from the CDC in 2016.
Right.
Have you got any idea what percentage of kids are going to therapy, are being seen by therapists? Who are therapists seeing mostly at the moment? Is it adults? Is it children?
So it's a great question. So we know that 40% of the rising generation has been through a therapist, but I think it's much higher because, what I refer to as bad therapy, this kind of iatrogenic therapy that makes your systems worse, right? Iatrogenesis is when a healer makes a problem worse. They're getting it in the schools. They're being treated to social emotional learning and wellness tips and all kinds of emotional regulation tips that are supposed to help, but I think it's making it worse. And I can explain why, but they're also getting it from parents who are treating them based on the best-selling books of neuropsychologists and various therapists. So kids are just absolutely awash in therapy today.
Right. Where's that 40% number from?
That's a good question. I have to look it up. It was widely reported a couple years ago, and I have to I'd have to look at my notes.
Okay.
Well, that sounds spurious, Miss Abigail Shrier. No, I'm kidding. So And where are we here?
Going to that. Where
There we are.
hyper.
Do you think that the issue is kids' mental health or the way that therapists are treating it?
So I think you have both issues. So I think that kids are suffering from bad lives, that bad things in their lives are making them sad, and they have good reason to be sad, and feel lonely and feel anxious. I think they have good reasons for those things, and it has to do with their lives. And I think that therapists are going in and asking over and over, and it's either the school counselor or an actual therapist or a teacher playing counselor or their parents aping the techniques given to them by therapists. And they're saying, tell me how you're feeling, monitor your feeling, let's talk about your feelings. And inevitably, it turns to negative feelings. A hyper focus on their feelings will elicit negative responses primarily. For any of us, by the way, and the hyper focus on the feelings with these kids who don't have the best lives is making their unhealthy lives worse and making them feel worse.
Is it not a case that the modern world is mentally tough? Things have changed an awful lot. The generation previously, which is now trying to raise and understand the world in which Gen Z is growing up, digitally native, always online, not seeing as much sunlight, obesity rates going up, all that stuff. Is it not just a case that the modern world's mentally tough and people are seeking treatment? They're just, things are harder mentally for people and they're looking for a way to fix that?
Well, in a way, so you could say that. You could say, well, things are tough, but it's a question of what we're talking about, okay? So if you go back generations, we're not living through the Blitz. They're not facing Nazi Germany, right? They're not living through World War, Great Depression, things that, traditionally would expect to encourage a great deal of anxiety in kids. But there are environmental contaminants, right? And there are things that naturally make us unhappier, like isolation from friends, like no touching, online porn, all these things, they're so unhealthy. But here's the thing to know, that if you have an unhealthy life, if you're out getting drunk, partying every day, every night, but not making real connections in the world, okay? If you spend all your time online with online porn and online friends, and you're unhappy, if you go and delete that signal, you don't have bad mental health that you're unhappy. That's good mental health. It's a natural signal of the body saying, stop. We have to fix something about this life. You don't want to delete that signal. Now, I'm not talking about major depressive disorder, because there are these things that are organic and chronic and severe and have nothing to do with anything you're doing. And that maybe should be treated with all kinds of things, like psychiatric medication. But if you're in a high-pressure job and you're feeling anxious and you delete that signal, that's not a mental health problem. That's your mental health operating correctly. Just like if you lost a loved one and you felt really sad. Gosh, that's a mentally healthy response. But instead, we're diagnosing the mental health as illness, and we're giving it when we're over-treating it in ways that are really going to make you worse off.
I remember in Johann Hari's book, Lost Connections, he talked about how grief is such a reliable inducer of depression that I think maybe the DSM, or maybe it was just advice for healthcare professionals, mental healthcare professionals, that someone who'd lost a close loved one, you basically can't diagnosed them with depression. I think it was for maybe 4 weeks, and then it got extended out, and then it was 8 weeks, and then it was 12 weeks, and they kept on doing this because depression or low mood is a natural response to a sad situation. One of the things that I'm struggling to thread the needle of your thinking here is, on one hand, we have emotions that are natural and normal. They are responses to an environment and the stresses that environment gives us. You're saying it is not good for us to ignore those, to try and delete those, but surely that is understanding emotions, integrating emotions, being able to talk about them, actually being able to feel your emotions and feel them in a safe way and think, okay, how am I feeling now? I'm feeling anxious. And does that mean that there's something wrong? Or can I talk to someone in a safe space and actually feel like, well, maybe it's because, Mum sort of said this thing earlier on and it made me feel a little bit of a way. It seems to me that a potential solution to having lots of emotions is not deleting them, but the process of therapy, which is being able to talk about them in a safe place with someone who listens.
So I think it matters whether you're talking about an adult or a child. So an adult can absolutely say, listen, I feel rotten. I don't care what you call it. I just got through a divorce. I feel terrible and I want to take a pill. I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that not only because I don't consider it my business, but also because an adult can start that and stop it and knows and has a life history to know how he's feeling and what he wants out of life and what he wants to do. A child doesn't know those things. So if you go in and delete a child's sex drive before the child has a sex drive, that's a problem. You're making a profound change in a child's life that they have no way of evaluating. Okay, so you do that to a teenager, and that's what when I say child, I include, teenagers, young people who are just sorting themselves out, right? An adult who goes through a divorce or a death and feels like they need to take something or feels like they need to talk to someone, look, by all means, they should do it. But I want to say, an adult can talk to a therapist for important reasons, for severe problems, but also for trivial ones, and get a lot out of it. Why? Because they don't face the same risks. See, if you or I went to therapy, we probably wouldn't be able to be convinced by a therapist that we were transgender. And we probably wouldn't be able to be convinced very easily that our parents were toxic and we should cut them off, or that we had experienced childhood trauma when we didn't. But a child is very, very easy to convince of those things.
How common is it for therapy?
Yeah, I was going to come away from that too, because I was thinking, like, as she was talking about that, I mean, she obviously, because I watched this a couple weeks ago, and I think I was pulling back from that. Like, they kind of talked about normal, sadness associated with grief or whatnot. But then I think her bigger picture is that adults have a contrast point. They're able to recognize, well, yeah, I know what things were like when they were good, and I'm just trying to get back to that baseline. I'm feeling crummy right now. I'm feeling anxious right now, and so once I get back to that baseline, I know that these things can stop. And instead, with kids, I think that, at least if I'm interpreting correctly, what she's saying is that that moment that you're with a therapist is such an influential point in that kid's life that kid can be convinced that they have things or are going through things that may not even be there. And so at that point, are you doing more harm than good? Like if a kid is sad because, I don't know, his grandma died or something, how difficult would it be to talking that kid into the fact that he has depression versus, oh no, I'm just sad. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I she did two things there. She parsed out the way that kids experience mental health and what the role of the therapist is or should be, and then the experience of an adult. And I like that she contrasted that for the reason that you're saying. An adult has a baseline gleaned from like years of just the wisdom of living life to have a better understanding of what some of these treatment options mean, or to truly understand, I guess, to be able to actually have informed consent to take a medication and to understand what that's about. And also an adult is, well, I mean, they're an adult, so they can do what they want anyway, but that they're in a better position to, I guess, to appropriately rank where the therapist and the corresponding advice or whatever comes from the therapist should be. Whereas a kid, like you're saying, the therapist might be much more influential. And I also liked, because I could feel the pushback on something before she covered it. She made a point of saying that she's not referring to like clinical depression or genuine post-traumatic stress disorder. I don't know if she said that specific one.
Yeah,
but because like this isn't one of those. I don't know. There's been celebrities in the past that completely downplay the field and act as though there is no such thing as these mental health diagnoses. And I like that she's clear about saying that no, these things do exist. There is a time and place to diagnose somebody with clinical depression, but that we need to be careful to not, I guess, funnel every negative emotion into a diagnosis, because then we're pathologizing just normal shit, normal things that we should be able to experience. Like, yeah, man, if your spouse dies or your kid gets sick, it's weird if you don't experience a strong emotion. In fact, it's adaptive to do that. Those emotions have like a biologically driven evolutionary purpose that's been honed through millions of years of genes being passed down that gives us these emotions that tell us to respond to our environment. And those can be good things. And then she also talked about like hyper focusing on the feelings themselves as opposed to maybe some lifestyle changes. I think she gets into that later too, but some lifestyle changes that would be much more beneficial than just continually stewing on this negative feeling and identifying my emotion.
Right. But it kind of makes me think about, how people get into, I was in a conversation one time with this gal who claimed she was, proficient and I don't know, she didn't say she was an expert, but she said she does DBT, right? And I said, "Oh, so you do CBT?" And she's all, "No, I said I do DBT." And I was like, "Well, DBT is just another form of CBT." And she's like, "No, it's not." I was like, "Well, do you know who developed DBT?" She's like, "Oh yeah, Marshall Linehan." And
You were walking her right down this road.
So I was like, "Oh yeah, I think I have the manual for DBT." Pulled up the manual. It's red and black, and I can't remember the name. I don't know. I can't remember the name of it. DBT or I don't know something. And I was like, "Is this the one that you use, like to pull out?" And she's, "Yeah, yeah." I was like, and I had it on on a computer, so I was like, "Okay." And I went to the introduction. This was page number 1, second paragraph. DBT is another form of CBT, and I was like, "So, what do you have to say?" That's wrong. I was like,
"Wrong."
It's like, let me go back. Well, the author is Marcia Linehan. She made it, so that's not right. And I'm like, dude. So
you found someone that can't be wrong.
Well, now what she had me convinced of, and this is what I was asking, because I wanted to have her tell me the differences, because I was introducing CBT, and I was saying, well, this is the model that we should be using. This is the most evidence-based model, and of course, I got pushback on the DBT. And I said, well, what differentiates the two? And she said, well, this is a lot more emotion focused. And I was like, okay. I was like, I'll cede that. Like, it does have a lot more focus on emotional regulation stuff.
Reactive mind or whatever.
I was like, however, I was like, that's not inconsistent with CBT. CBT certainly wants you to address emotions, but only to the degree that your emotion is above and beyond what could be considered a normal reaction to the situation. Because we know emotions affect thoughts, and thoughts further affect emotions. And so if your emotions are kind of out of whack, then your thoughts are going to be out of whack too. We get that. But we teach clients emotional regulation techniques all the time. But they're not designed to just treat the emotion. They're designed to treat the emotion and then come back to the thought. We always want the client to go back to the thought.
Why is it better to focus on the thought?
Well, because your thoughts are, situations you can't really control, right? They're happening to us all the time. Your thoughts, though, is how you're interpreting those situations. And that drives everything else. So, and your thoughts, your emotions, you kind of, they're almost like instincts. They're like high level, like really advanced instincts.
Right.
So you think of a, like a deer, out in the wild or something like that. And they have like one operating all the time, which is fear and survival, right? So any little thing, that's adaptive for them, and it's helped them survive for a long time. Now, us, we have some emotions that just don't even matter nearly as much as that. It's not nearly about survival. But I always say they're not unimportant, though. They're alarm bells that you should just pay attention to. That say that's all it is. It's like, hey, pay attention to what's going on if you're feeling an emotion. Now, where that came from, your objective is to determine, is this emotion consistent with the situation or is it not? And if it's so, maybe I need to reduce that. And I think, like on clinical depression, that's where medications are helpful, is because if my depressive symptoms are so dramatic that it affects my mood to the degree that, I can't even think clearly, well then, yeah, like probably we want that emotion to be more accurate. And that's why I always tell people, I was like, we don't want people happy all the time. That's silly, because you should be able to feel sad sometimes and worried sometimes. What I want is accuracy in your emotion. That's the most important thing, is accuracy, because then that's not going to cloud your thinking. Then you're more capable of controlling and generating balanced thoughts about the situation. And you can guarantee the other piece is, whether you know it or not, that emotion is driven by a thought. You just weren't aware of the thought. So that emotion has to be tamped down before you start focusing on thoughts. So that's why we focus on the thoughts, because everything else stems from them. So I think that's an important point that she makes there, but that, like, always talking about feelings all the time, like that cliche question, how does that feel?
Right. It's useful to use the feeling as maybe a barometer for what's happening, and it kind of can point you toward, like you're saying, is this feeling adaptive for the situation? Is it proportional? Does it make sense? And kind of another offshoot of CBT would be REBT, rational emotive behavior therapy, Ellis, and I think, and one of the things in that, like a big emphasis is on deciding if a thought is rational or irrational. And a lot of times you look at the degree to which the emotion has been spiked. And so, well, this, like if a client comes in and talks about being really angry, you might have him scale his anger on a scale of 1 to 10 and 100, 1 to 100. And the idea isn't to then dwell in it. It's to, like, okay, your anger is at an 80%. That's really high. Let's look at the thoughts that led to the anger getting spiked to an 80. And then from there you can parse out and decide, like, okay, is this thought rational or irrational? And I think that's a differentiation from what I've seen some of our contemporaries in our field, other therapists do, is that, like, the idea of that the emotion is never wrong. That it's like, it's all you're feeling, what you feel is okay, obviously, but, like, it doesn't mean that that feeling is going to be an effective thing for you, and that, you know what I mean?
I think they get confused sometimes because we are taught through, like, motivational interviewing to validate and affirm emotions when they're identified.
Yes, this is what I'm trying to.
That doesn't, however, mean that they're accurate. Validation and affirmation are not synonyms for accuracy.
Good.
If I experience an emotion, it may be completely disproportionate to the situation that is happening. But in order to kind of move that forward and grease the wheels with the client, I'm simply reflecting back to them that if they are experiencing that emotion, like, how crummy it must feel as a result of that. But that's all that is opening doors before I'm even trying to get to interventions. The problem is even as we're talking about this, is I'm like, God, dude, could a kid even comprehend what we're talking about? I mean, abstract thought, thinking about your thoughts and thinking about your emotions. Are they even capable cognitively of getting this concept?
I'm not nearly as effective working with teenagers or kids because I operate so heavily in this that it's tough for me to.
Right. I mean, we'd have dumbed this down dramatically to get them to get it, right? Which is sometimes when I see, like, play therapy being done with kids, and that might as well be witchcraft to me. Like, I see that and people playing in sand and, with old He-Man figures and shit. Like, I'm like, I don't know if anything's happening there. Like, I'm not talking shit on play therapy, by the way. I'm an idiot and I don't know anything about it. I'm saying I don't know the process.
I haven't been training it either.
What's happening there? You know what I mean? So some of these techniques that I think therapists are taught, they assume they can be applied to a kid as easily as they are as an adult. And I would just say cognitively, I don't think they're capable of getting to that point. Maybe teenagers, but not necessarily to that. You know what I mean? You just have to really dumb it down. So that kind of goes into this next question, because they talk about, is therapy making mental health worse over time? So it's like a 3-minute clip here. So
feel a whole lot worse.
So, in your opinion, does therapy make people better or worse in terms of their mental health?
Depends if they need it, and depends
who we're talking about. So for people who are there for a prescribed problem, absolutely it can be very, very helpful, even life-saving. Okay. Now, for adults who are there to work on something, that can be very helpful too, because they're motivated to participate and get to the bottom of things. They want to do the hard work of therapy. And then there are people who maybe lead high profile lives or for whatever reason don't feel comfortable sharing, unloading to those around them. And that can be very helpful too. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about mass prophylactic therapy that's being dumped on children who didn't ask for it. The difference there is, first of all, you don't start out with a patient who's game to work, right? So you have to kind of pander to them to get them involved because they didn't choose to be there in the first place. But second of all, they might be doing just fine. They might not want to think about their parents' divorce or their mother's death right now because Tuesdays at 2 p.m. might not be a time when they're ready to do that. But nonetheless, through school counselors casually dabbling in this, and even therapists regularly asking about it, that's not necessarily helpful. And of course, there's a lot of research bearing this out, that therapy can make people sadder and feeling less capable in their lives.
What's the results of that research? What did you find?
Sure. So they did these great studies with, there's a lot of it. Burn victims, first responders to catastrophe, breast cancer survivors, all of them, those dealing with natural bereavement, grief from the death of a loved one. All of those people were led, they had actual control groups, so they actually tested this, and they were led to feel worse. The group that went to therapy felt worse afterwards than the group that didn't go. Why? Because we're built to recover from grief from the loss of a loved one, which doesn't mean that every one of us will, because some of us might need extra help. The majority, the default assumption should be that hang out with friends, see people who love you, do some good in the world, get to work on a project, you will feel better, do exercise, which is remarkably helpful. I mean, God, that we don't start by getting kids to exercise who are sad is kind of criminal when you see the wonderful benefits of exercise as held up against things like therapy and psychiatric medications.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think she's really kind of speaking to, and maybe therapists do this. I think people are way more resilient than we believe them to be, and particularly kids. I mean, kids are tough. I mean, I'm saying mentally. Okay, this brings me back to that idea that when and it happens, it'll probably happen. We have our conference coming up in October. I almost guarantee somebody's gonna bring up the ACEs, right? The Adverse Childhood Events Checklist, and almost like as a one of those
proof of trauma,
jaw-dropping moments that all of us have gone through some shit when we were kids, right? And I was like, well, yeah, like of course, but isn't she kind of getting to the fact that that's normal? Like there should be some rough times when you're a kid. I mean, I'm not talking about, and again, I'm not talking about like, being abused or being molested or anything like that. I'm just saying normal childhood kind of sucks sometimes. I mean, I remember, again, like in middle school, that was horrible, but I loved high school. And part of it though is I think in middle school, my social skills sucked big time. And I was so worried about just looking stupid when I went to school, like that, it was difficult for me to learn my personality because they're just so, it's like, oh my God, I don't want to look stupid and get made fun of. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard for me to learn my personality. And then I think when I kind of got done, I got to be a freshman. I was like, oh, okay, this is who I am. And I was comfortable with it and everything was fine. You know what I mean? I dug high school. I really liked my junior, senior year. That was a great time. But if I hadn't gone through some shitty times in middle school, I don't think I would have been able to do that. You know what I mean? So I don't know. Sometimes is it less is more? Is that kind of what she's saying? Is a therapist could easily just say, yeah, you should probably just play with your friends more and get outside, exercise a little bit. You'd probably feel a whole lot better.
As opposed to like zeroing in on the whatever the child's current crisis is and focusing on it, just encouraging the kid to do what kids do and or even as she was applying to adults, the loss of a loved one, like, hey, hang out with some people you know and love, get some exercise in, you will feel better. And because we do adapt and respond to life. And again, this is that thing where we don't want therapy to become iatrogenic. We don't want to be making it worse by focusing on something just for the sake of dwelling on the emotion. And that it's actually interesting that this may, I have to, I guess, be kind of careful with how I explain this, because I'm describing somebody that I work with.
Mm-hmm.
This person I work with has been a longtime client, and general outpatient,
Mm-hmm.
longtime client, and super functional person. Good job, sharp, bright, articulate, doing well in a good relationship,
Mm-hmm.
and yet still comes and sees me. So it's like, well, what the hell?
Mm-hmm.
And here's the thing. So the person originally started coming in to see me after getting out of a pretty horrific relationship, a lot of bad stuff there. And there was an acute mental health crisis to deal with that led to this person showing up. And then over time, this person keeps rescheduling, and we're not continually rehashing the thing that brought this person into treatment. We're focusing on life development, other things. This person likes to be able to have someone to talk to, and we'll set sometimes workout goals at times. We'll set we'll work on relationship skills, like different things to make this already functional person function even better. And I'm continually, probably once every 3 months, when we do our treatment plans, I make a point of ensuring that they know they're free to leave at any time, and that if they want to keep rescheduling. And so therapy can be effective without overly dwelling on the trauma. Mm-hmm. This person bounced back really well and decided they get a lot of value out of focusing on some of the things that make people happy in general, and just improving their skills in that area.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I wonder again where that drive comes from on, is the therapist in that situation, because she referred to it as like a prophylactic like blanket application of therapy, which I don't think all kids have to go to a therapist, but I mean, if there's any, and we're, I mean, obviously, I don't know, listeners, if we operate out of Utah, so Utah's a relatively conservative state compared to other states, and so I don't know, I mean, how school systems work in other states. I don't pretend to know about that, but yeah, sometimes I would think that a referral to a counselor may be completely unnecessary, and yeah, and then again, like what exactly are you trying to accomplish here? And then are you trying to get into something that isn't there? And I think that comes from, like, I guess the glamorization of therapy, maybe in like pop culture or something like that. People see, because anytime I see a therapist on TV or even on, I've seen shows like, I don't know, couples therapy or celebrity rehab, and I'm like, well, that's not how therapy. That
I know, huh?
That's bullshit. Like that's, I mean,
right.
I'm not. I mean, I know people get better, whatever. I'm saying there's probably something happened behind the scenes that's just not very glamorous, and it's just not very exciting, and it wouldn't be good TV, right?
Basically.
But people see that, and I think that they want those things. They want breakthroughs.
Yep, breakthroughs.
They want tears. They want, these magical moments. And I was like, I don't know. A lot of therapy, I'm not going to say it's boring. I'm saying it's not that dramatic sometimes. Right. And we have to kind of be comfortable with that. And less is definitely more on that end, because if we do over pathologize it, and they kind of get into that because they like, in this next one, this is one of my favorite parts of this is they talk about the overuse of the word trauma. And this might be one of the last things we look at, but I mean, it just kind of goes back into a lot of what we've discussed already previously on some of these.
Before you jump into
it,
for sure. What do you, so I want to try steel man in this first, but like there's a common thing that we hear that, and a lot of my friends say, a lot of people I know close to me say that, everyone should go to therapy. And it's
that's so stupid.
It's at the point of almost being like a mantra.
Yeah.
And
if you're a therapist, you should have a therapist.
Right. And so I can steel man that, I think.
Yeah.
That the idea is that if I think of myself as not needing it, it's possible I have a blind spot, or that maybe there's something that I need to work through, and that maybe if nothing else, I could develop some insight into myself that I didn't otherwise have at a minimum. And maybe if there is something that, I mean, I'm skeptical about the idea of repressed memories, but like if there is something that I haven't really dealt with, that I'm not realizing, I'm not connecting the dots, that, oh yeah, this thing that happened to me back here kind of explains why I'm this way now, that a therapist, an outside sounding board, is going to be able to help me work through it. And so the idea is that I think the reason people say that too is to like dispel the stigma, so that it's not like, we're above it, and that like it should be accessible to everybody, so as to not make people feel like only weirdos go to therapy. And so I think it's said with good intention, so as to not make people feel like they're a weirdo if they come to therapy. I think that's good.
I have a counter to that, though. Think about this, though. Okay, so
well, that's my steel man. I'm not making the case. That's just me saying that's what I think the reason is.
Okay.
Yeah. But I was going to get into the counter. Like, so those are all the reasons I think that mantra, everyone needs therapy, or everyone should go to therapy. I think that's where it comes from. It's to dispel the stigma, and it's to also point out that no one's above having a blind spot, and that maybe you do have something to work on. That's what I think. That's where I think it comes from. What do you think?
Well, sure. I don't think stigma is such a bad thing, though. Like, I mean, stigma is us simply recognizing something isn't right here, right? Like, isn't that what it is? I mean,
what is a stigma? Stigma is like a reputation, in a way. Like if something has a stigma.
I get it, but I know. Well, I'm not going to look up Webster's. I'm saying a stigma essentially shows that something isn't right here, and I have a negative opinion about that.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know if there's anything wrong with that. I mean, if I have depression,
what if that keeps me out of the therapy office, though? What if I do have something I could benefit from it, but I've got this idea in my head that only weirdos go do that shit?
Oh, no.
I need to
so
hear.
Now I think that thought is weird. Like, that's a weird thought. Only weirdos go to therapy. I'm saying that if you had a legit problem, now what you're see, this is what I'd say to that is, okay, but when you go to therapy, you're receiving treatment, right?
Yeah.
Mental health treatment.
Yep.
Okay. Intervention, right? And we're supposed to believe that that's a paralleled, or maybe a subcategory of the medical field, correct? Okay.
It's supposed to be.
So let's just say I tell myself, I say, I feel fine, but maybe I've got a heart problem. I don't think I do, but maybe I do. Only overweight people and people who are old, they only have heart problems. But I might as well go get some treatment for my heart problem. Doctor says I don't have anything, but I don't know. I mean, maybe I should look into that a little bit more. Maybe we should probe a little bit more. Maybe I should start taking blood pressure medic. You see what I'm like? The application of treatment, I think, is where you start to get into problems, because why treat something that's not even there? That I don't have a recognition of that, unless I'm able to discern that something is there. So I'm not saying yet you can get assessed or something like that. It's probably good to get a checkup,
that's okay.
A mental health checkup, but if
a doctor checkup if you have heart problems.
Sure, but if the therapist and or whoever says you're fine, you don't, then you need to roll with that.
Sure,
and walk away from it, because application of treatment.
Get out of my office.
Application of treatment is where things become a problem. Like I think that. I think looking in on, maybe I do have a blind spot, and I look into this and I talk to somebody for an hour and a half for an evaluation, mental status exam, whatnot. And then they say, no, you're fine. Everything's, I don't see any problems here. You should be just fine. Keep doing your thing.
Like if they come in for like the prophylactic assessment, just like, hey,
sure.
Am I good?
Am I
normal?
Right. But I mean, think about that anytime. I just was at doctor's office, and, there was a PHQ-9 I saw and a GAD-7, and I'm like,
seeing those too.
Okay, well, good. Now, if everything's cool, then everything's cool. And I would assume that primary care physician, if they notice something, would give a referral out. And you need to be able to roll with that. So That's why I don't believe in you should be active in therapy. I mean, the client that you referred to, I think that's perfectly good, fine. Like, and plus, by the way, that's also none of my business. Like, if
It's an adult.
well, right.
Yeah.
I think about a person who says, I have somebody that once every 3 months or once a month or whatever it is, that I can go in and dump all my shit on, and legally they can't tell anybody about it. And they give me objective feedback.
Yep.
And after I feel better, I was like, well, whether you have functional impairment or a diagnosis or not, that who cares? That's fine. You know what I mean? I'm saying I don't know how, like, kind of to what Abigail's saying is, I don't know how beneficial that might be to a kid. That's just not normal, for a kid. If a kid's able to recognize and say, "Holy crap, something's wrong here, and I just am not feeling right," and they're seeking therapy, well, then yeah, like of course. But trying to, like, I don't know, grease it up to convincing them they have a problem, that's, I think,
Sure.
where you cross some barriers and some boundaries that may make the patient worse at that point.
Agreed.
Okay, let's watch this last clip, and then we will wrap
Word.
up here.
Holler.
Holla.
At different times in my life. But here's the thing. It also is because of you. So I have a feeling you're the sort of guy who could get a lot out of talking to a bus driver for an hour too. Right? Or talking to your grandfather or anybody else. You'd probably get a lot out of that. So the question is, the therapist as a profession, are they doing more help than harm? Well, with kids, I think they're doing more harm than good.
What about the use of the term trauma? We see this bandied around on the internet a lot.
It's maybe the worst thing to happen to this generation is the overuse of the word trauma. There's a wonderful new study out by this woman, Kathy Whiteham, who does these brilliant prospective studies. I believe she's British, but I don't know. And she does these brilliant prospective studies, which are the most rigorous kind. And she looked at kids who had documented instances of abuse as children, and then she waited and followed them. And we checked in again 10, 15 years with researchers who were blinded as to which group they fell into. Were the kids who actually experienced a traumatic event or potentially traumatic event, or those who didn't? And what she found was the most important factor in whether they had adult psychopathology, adult mental health problems, was whether they thought the childhood incident was whether they made that part of their narrative. For the adults who didn't think it was significant, even when they went through something potentially traumatic as children, they had great mental health as adults. And the ones who had built it into their narrative, even events that weren't documented, may not have occurred, those people were suffering in adulthood.
So wait, is she saying by virtue of seeing a therapist after a traumatic event, that as a child, that that event now is given more significance than it deserved, and it's now embedded into you as this something that maybe you can't ever bounce back from? Then when you go into adulthood, they look back on that and say, well, the significance of that event was so dramatic. That's why I am the way I am, and they're messed up as adults.
I think she's pointing out that a therapist, in an effort to do this like archaeological dig through their client's mind to find the bad thing that happened to them,
right?
Because like I want to make sure I heard her right, because like she basically said, so if you and I both go through a traumatic event when we're little, and we grow into whoever we are, and I, for whatever reason, like now the story of Jeff Moore involves this, terrible thing where I got thrown off a bridge or something.
I remember that.
Yeah. Because he fell off too.
Yeah.
It became a part of me, and that's like now my story. It's like, oh yeah, and it's like that's a part of how I describe who I am, is I have this piece of trauma that I pack around with me, and explain that you went through the exact same thing, but like even though you went through the exact same incident, when you describe who Mace Warren is as a man today, that story doesn't make it into as a part of your life history of any significance. You are going to function more healthily than I am, because I've made it part of my narrative. I think that's what she said.
Right. And I would say that probably the only reason why that was there is because somebody was talking about it unnecessarily. It's not to undermine being thrown off a bridge. I'm sorry that happened to you.
Thanks.
But or whatever happened to kids. Like, I'm not trying to undermine that. I'm saying you should trust the natural resilience of them to bounce back from that. And assuming that just because they experience something traumatic that they're going to be doomed if they don't
Right.
get into therapy. That's a problem, because like you shouldn't try to convince somebody that they're a victim, or that they are. You should never try to convince somebody that they're traumatized. That's not up for you to decide. Now, again, if you got thrown off a bridge and 6 months later you're having nightmares every night of being thrown off a bridge, and you don't go by bridges, and maybe your walk to school is to a bridge, and so now you're not going to school as a result because you're not. I was like, yeah, you probably need to talk to somebody about that. Like that now is denoting the functional impairment that we use as a means for saying, yeah, they do meet diagnostic criteria, and here's the reasons why. Like, I mean, if you got a little worried, or dare I say anxious, because you're going across, if you're driving by a bridge every now and then, you're like, geez, okay, that's pretty. That I would assume that's pretty normal.
Right.
You know what I mean? So that's why I don't know why they. I don't think we misheard her. I rewinded a little bit, but let's just see one more time what she was saying. I just want to make sure.
Kids from slightly neglectful parents. Now, in an extreme circumstance of abuse, of course, you need to go in there and get the child out. But that's not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about this dumping of therapy on every child. But I'll say something else that occurred to me, Chris, when you were talking about, how good therapy can be for an adult. Look, it also really depends on the adult. Because a lot of young adults, there's no question therapy is participating in their alienation. Young adults, the oldest members of Gen Z, are alienated as parents and cutting them off in higher numbers than we've ever seen before. And they're doing it for reasons not because they were physically or sexually abused or anything dramatic or severe, but usually like I felt I wasn't emotionally supported by my mother. It's things that, gosh, if you raise children of your own, you might think that you could excuse, because it's really hard to raise kids, actually. It's pretty hard. And it's really hard when you have a job. Everybody else, you'd probably get a lot out of that. So the question is, the therapist as a profession, are they doing more help than harm? Well, with kids, I think they're doing more harm than good.
Here we go.
What about the use of the term trauma? We see this bandied around on the internet a lot.
Way too far back.
It's maybe the worst thing to happen to this generation is the overuse of the word trauma. There's a wonderful new study out by this woman, Kathy Whiteham, who does these brilliant prospective studies. I believe she's British, but I don't know. And she does these brilliant prospective studies, which are the most rigorous kind. And she looked at kids who had documented instances of abuse as children, and then she waited and followed them and checked in again 10, 15 years with researchers who were blinded as to which group they fell into. Were the kids who actually experienced a traumatic event or potentially traumatic event, or those who didn't? And what she found was the most important factor in whether they had adult psychopathology, adult mental health problems, was whether they thought the childhood incident was whether they made that part of their narrative. For the adults who didn't think it was significant, even when they went through something potentially traumatic as children, they had great mental health as adults. And the ones who had built it into their narrative, even events that weren't may not have occurred, those people were suffering in adulthood. So it turns out the way we describe our lives is really, really important to whether we thrive or not.
Would good trauma-informed care not try to unpack that and then teach you that you are a person that's outside of that, to transcend whatever it was? Is trauma-informed care not about casting that off from you?
Well, I interviewed a wonderful physician in England who deals with ex-convicts in Plymouth, who many of whom experienced unspeakable abuse as children. And one of the things he said to me was the problem with this so-called trauma-informed care is it presumes inappropriately that everyone is helped by talking about their traumatic experience. Some people are able to put it behind them, and you're only re-traumatizing by making them talk about it. So what he does with adults who've been through a lot is he waits and takes their lead, and some of them, he acknowledges that they went through something hard and moves on. And then they talk about today.
Perfect.
And
Damn, dude.
Yep.
Yeah, like that.
That's exactly
that just
right.
sounds like exactly. She deserves some applause on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's so true. Like, I mean, follow their lead is what you should be doing.
Start where the client is.
Everybody talks about that trauma-informed care, and I don't know why, just that. God, I am so sick of that word, and it shouldn't be something that I'm sick of, but it is so misused that's why I'm sick of it, and
Right.
just and also giving a top shelf label to something that it doesn't require it.
I think that's the problem.
Right. Yeah. Like, I mean, just saying, oh, well, we all have our own trauma we bring to this field. First of all, I don't even know what you mean by that. When you're telling therapists, you have all your own trauma you bring this field.
Does that mean we all had something bad happen to us at one point in life?
Everybody,
or are
yeah.
they saying that we genuinely, in a clinical sense, are carrying around this burlap sack full of shit that we have not been able to work through, and that it's impacting
if
us
that's
every
the
day?
case, you shouldn't be a therapist, buddy. I'm just telling you. Okay, maybe you should take a break and work on that stuff before you have to do that, because you're not even, you know what I mean? Like, and it's not trying to act tough either. I'm saying, like, I can genuinely look at times in my life as like, yeah, that sucked, but I'm over it, and I didn't let that define me. Like that whole
That's
thing.
what she's saying.
Well, and that whole thing about a narrative, they, in fact, in trauma-focused CBT, you know what a huge component of that is? A trauma narrative that the kid walks through as kind of redefining what happened in the circumstance. But it's a huge component of it. And the only reason why that would be effective is if it was leading to functional impairment in the first place.
Right. It'd be
now
really effective for that kid if he's
Right.
been traumatized.
But if he's not, if he's just doing natural resilience, it's going to make him worse.
Yep.
Because now his narrative is going to be defining something that never was there in the first place, and that he would have naturally recovered from regardless.
Right.
So
we need to be careful that we're not like downloading our own thoughts onto the client that we think, because I don't know, man, I'm sure you've had plenty of clients to where like they've been through some wild shit and they're telling you about it, but they seem to have just rolled with it. It's been,
oh yeah,
and it's in their past.
all the time.
Like some of the stories I hear from prison.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God.
All the time. I mean, it's kind of like I was hearing a story from I did an assessment on a kid not too long ago, and he was telling me a story. And did you ever watch any of that Ruby Frank stuff?
No.
About here in Utah, Ruby Frank, and how she was like torturing her kids and stuff?
No.
Oh, you need to watch that. You like, there's a 2020 on it. It's on like Hulu. Just check it out. It's really sad, but there's and you can't watch it and like not feel like so bad for those kids.
Wow.
It is so tragic. And he's telling me this story, and I was like, dude, damn near identical to what was going on, but worse. And he just nonchalantly telling me, oh yeah, no, just going over it. And I was like, now again, everybody, now the problem with this is that it is, I think in some cases, like for whatever reason, he bounced back from that. And she had mentioned earlier, this was something that she said, hey, during World War II, like nobody was dealing with this, like during the Blitzkrieg or whatever. And part of me thinks that like if you're, and I guess this goes back to like Maslow or something like that, like if you're worried about survival from day to day, you don't know where your next meal is coming from, you don't know where you're going to lay your head down. I don't know if you have enough time for mental health issues. You know what I mean? So that's not to say put yourself in dire circumstances, but I would say that the fact that we are probably living in the most comfortable time in existence is part of that issue as well. But just let kids get through it, and people in general, like believe in their resilience to kind of bounce back from those things, and don't over pathologize things that just aren't there.
I think that's the great way to put what you're like. The positive spin on what you're saying is believe in our clients' resilience, and they're that's
100%.
That's exactly I think that's a great way to capture the message.
Yeah, good wrap up point.
Yeah,
and there was, I guarantee, a 3-minute part on our video that was silent. So sorry, I'm not going to edit that shit. No way. So, everything else is great though. So okay, we have anything else we want to say on this?
No.
Okay, we'll give ourselves one more round of applause. Thanks for listening to us dummies.